Welcome to The Check-In, a podcast by Telos, where we explore the headlines from Israel-Palestine across the world, wading into the complexity of seemingly intractable conflict to discover the power of peacemaking to heal us, our community, and our world. This is your host, David Kadabaugh, checking in from Washington, D.C. As some of you may know, last month we did something unexpected. We took a group not of Americans on our trip through the U.S. South, but a group of Palestinians. A cadre of 4 Palestinian theologians, the next generation of scholars and activists and social scientists, joined us in an exploration of U.S. history and how its legacies carry us to the present, both the currents of deep injustice and the wellsprings of our deepest humanity that emerged in the communities who embodied a different way for all of us. A way of justice and truth. This trip carried its attendant heartbreak as normal and some unexpected places of joy. But what was most clear was the undeniable solidarity that emerged between our friends from Palestine and our partners across the South. You see, what we have been learning and exploring for many years is the overwhelming connections across both of these contexts. The same forces of exclusion, erasure, domination, hierarchy, and even the weaponization of theology exist both in the United States and in Israel-Palestine. But the shared suffering under these forces opens space for a shared commitment to justice, to liberation, to dignity and belonging, even in the face of dehumanization. Our friends recognized quickly, walking the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama, the site of the voting rights marches in 1965, in hearing from Houma Nation leaders in Dulac, Louisiana, the truth of our interconnectedness and deliverance, that none of us are free until all of us are free. This trip established this truth deeply into the hearts of all who went, myself included, and it established a web of solidarity that has the potential to carry us to new places of freedom, dignity, and flourishing. We at Telos are committed to that work, this work of solidarity, this work of encouragement, this work of connection and action. And I'm so excited for you all to learn more about it during this show. Here with us today are 2 folks who were on that trip, Dr. DeSean Dyson, Director of ReStory US, and Daniel Bannoura, a PhD candidate in Quranic studies at Notre Dame and Palestinian Christian from Beit Sahor, just outside of Bethlehem. DeSean will ground us with some of the context around our ReStory US program to start off, and then we'll transition to my conversation with Daniel about his experience on the trip, which I found to be a powerful and insightful conversation on the importance and challenges of solidarity work, and how its ultimate goal is to make us more human. So there's so much wisdom in this episode, folks. It's a really rich show, and I hope you enjoy. DeSean, thanks for joining the show. Where are you checking in from?
Checking in from Jackson, Mississippi.
DeSean, it's good to have you back on the show, even though I wish I was back there in Jackson with you on this experience. So before we get further into the conversation, I want to give our listeners a little bit of background about the ReStory US program more broadly. Why do we organize this experience? What are we hoping to accomplish, not only for the participants themselves, but also in our larger society?
No, thank you for even the desire to properly contextualize what we're doing. One of the things that I'll tell people, and this isn't a disclaimer to protect me from questions, because people's minds and imaginations and curiosities often run um, at a pretty high level when they're seeing the things and engaging the people they engage on these trips. But this is more to sort of set a tone of how to engage the space. And I'll say this to folks that my expertise, and I always quantify that if you truly understand expertise, then it's a pretty narrow scope. Like to be an expert at something is a really, really defined sort of idea of what you know exhaustively. And so my expertise is engaged scholarship, like community engaged research. And so that's being in places, understanding the depth and richness of what it means to hear from and have proximity to, in like much more scientific terms, like a phenomenon. But what we know as we talk about restoring um, ideas and in our own bodies, scripts and patterns and histories that we may feel are very familiar to us because we've heard about them since we were in grade school and high school through our news and education processes, these things that we've built patterns of what we would call knowledge and patterns what we would call familiarity, but actually proximity and perspectives will help us to rebuild layers to ourselves and layers to our world that are really, really just strengthening to us as a collective. We talk about it, telos, human flourishing. The idea is not to evoke, whether it be trauma and anger on those who are hearing sort of the embodied harm done against, their people, whether it be indigenous, African American, immigrant communities, is not to locate, further culpability on people who are descendant of folks who have closer proximity to harm. It's not to induce shame on people who find themselves closer to those stories. To understand through these curated experiences, through these partners and meeting these people, how a more full story, how a more authentic and stronger connection to that place and to that experience can produce something in us that makes us more whole. And so to restory a place, to restory our context and understanding of so many, in this case, it's the US South. In other cases, we always talk about how does restoring your own community, how does restoring these other parts of the country, what does that look like? That we've had a commitment to what does it mean to put layers on these experiences and engaging in communities and with partners who can help us add layers to these experiences.
So we're taking this trip across the US South, giving folks encounters with our history in new ways, with the stories of our nation's past and present in the communities that may not often be heard by our communities or communities in power. And all of this is embarking on a kind of transformation for both us and for our larger nation to ultimately flourish, as you're saying, to promote human flourishing, this realization of justice and possibility and dignity and freedom and security and all of the things that we all need to flourish. So tell us, what exactly is happening across this week that we're traveling? What are the places that we're going? What are the people that we're meeting? What are the things that are emerging? Tell us more.
So, one of the things that we acknowledge is, I made reference to while we acknowledge there may be a tension or a pull towards historical culpability or where damage or hurt has been passed down generationally. Well, that's rooted in historical truth that there are real things that have happened that have compounding and um, projecting persistent impacts on communities um, like all over this country. And so when we talk about the plantation system and the plantation economy, and what does it look like to have from the inception and introduction of a peoples to this land an exploitive and dehumanizing view of people from African descent, their introduction to a place that commodified their labor, that objectified them through legal code, through government sanctioned and codified means. We talk about these words, but then you see what does it look like to actually make people tools of labor. We see a plantation system where um, you have the humanity fixated on the majority white culture, the elites of the society, and you see literal physical harm and degradation in the form of harsh labor practices, sexual assault, abuse, murder, to some extent in some of these things. We see displacement, we see erasure of cultures of indigenous people. And so we talk about historical truths that we again can see from these very well curated experiences of the Indians as they walk us through, what does it look like to maintain a culture through federal government acts of erasure where they in their own communities have had to build their own institutions to try to promote and to save things like language, things like traditions. But also we see the means by which communities like in the Congo Square, they had their own identity affirming rituals and their own identity affirming means of protecting and sort of propagating who they were. And so we literally name, what are the harms that were done, what were the coercive and corrective measures, and walk through sort of the development of these systems in the country to the civil rights movement, to Reconstruction in America, to incarceration and what that's done when the 13th Amendment has a caveat that, um, slavery is over, except for in cases of, as punishment for a crime. And it's no coincidence that we start in the state in this country with the highest incarcerated population in the country, that we see that these systems manifest and turn into something. And so as we walk people through what feels like a historical experience, we can actually, through these amazing partners, talking about the implications of how in Cancer Alley, they're talking about the death of loved ones literally weeks before we show up. They're talking about how they have concerns of their children going to school because of the chemicals in the air. We're connecting historical injustices because we're better understanding history in ways that we may have not had access to stories that were not. When we say our stories, we hope that we're building a collective identity, that your story is my story. So they are our stories, but this is an ethos or an idea that we all shared commonly, but through a mutual flourishing lens, they become our stories. And so, as we hear our story as a nation, that we hear how it's developed, and we hear how even today some of these things, not just on account of like an American South story, but on a U.S. national story, and then going into like a solidarity movement, that this has long been tied to, especially the American civil rights tradition, that this is a global human rights story, that this is when anyone anywhere is under the thongs of oppression, that that is something that we all should be activated and concerned with.
So, what you're saying is we're having these experiences on this trip. At least we started in New Orleans. We got to meet with a number of folks who are doing the work around telling our history of enslavement in New Orleans. We go to a former plantation. We go to the bayou. We meet with the former Homo community, this indigenous community that doesn't even have federal recognition. We go to Jackson, where you're from, and talk about a number of these issues as they exist in the modern day, seeing and connecting the legacies from historic injustices that didn't end, just evolved in a number of ways. And we're finishing in Selma and Montgomery, Alabama. So tell us any reflections you had on this particular trip, things you saw, things you experienced traveling with this group of Palestinian and Israeli leaders from the region. We'd love to hear.
There were so many, David. One in particular is what I hope when we talk about like a transformational experience, that even for me, one of the things for me, and we talk about this being a formative experience, and that's even for me as someone who is a facilitator, that I never engage the space as if I know everything and that there's not something to be revealed to me. It's this more heightened and developed sense of empathy that I hope to carry with me. And so I did a lot of watching and listening. And one of the things that we talk about this on the trips, that the table is this really important space where a lot of processing happens. And so a group of us, it happened to be, me, and you've done a podcast, and my dear brother, Jamar Tisby, who joined us, and a couple of the scholars from Palestine. We were talking about our interactions as men, and we sort of added the caveat, like, as educated men, our interactions with law enforcement sometimes. And so we were just sort of asking each other, like, how do you act? Like, what do you do when, for me, as if you've seen me, like, I'm a bigger guy, and my presence, I'm aware, like, I kind of tend to tone it down if I'm in the presence of law enforcement, because I don't want my being to be an escalating factor in something that I'd rather just walk away from and it not be a thing in a high incarceration, high, criminalized society. Well, that conversation, the parallels were just uncanny as we talked for, I bet you were there. I think we were all at the table together. We talked about that. Well, for the rest of the trip, one of the things that really, really made me sort of sensitive and almost uncomfortable was the recognition of our use of metal detectors at various stops and museum locations. And I academically understood the prominence of checkpoints. Like, it's something I've read about, and it's something that I've, you know, had news exposure to what that meant. But after hearing them express through our shared lexicon of how that interaction, like, what does it mean to have that kind of constant potential escalator in your presence, I found myself every time we went through like a basic security checkpoint, like, I would just get closer to them and I would, like, put a hand on the shoulder and just try to give some sort of sign that, like, hey, like, I can't tell you, be comfortable. This is different. Don't worry. Like, your body's telling you how to respond when you feel something that feels so similar to something that may be unsafe. But it made me want to be closer and to have empathy for, okay, like, there are experiences that I just can't account for with my own experience. And it was very powerful to me. And they were very gracious to explain to me that, like, no, what I see that you're noticing now something that since we've gotten here, that even here, like, one of my initial thoughts, one said to me, we can't take this. Like, everywhere we go, it's like these checkpoints continue. And so that was pretty challenging to me, about how even my empathy, there was a desire to kind of explain, well, in our context, here's what's happening here, but recognizing the reality is that some of these embodied responses and realities are things that are hard, that just the desire to explain away someone's experience is not the wise and loving thing to do. To sit there and listen and learn is the thing that's more valuable and more appropriate. And so that was really powerful for me.
Man, it's so powerful to hear you explain that story and the connections that emerged of solidarity, and also the opportunity for self-interrogation or exposure and learning to happen. And that work, I just find, is so essential. And it's what our work is right now in this moment, to build these connections across contexts, to build relationships and commit to showing up for each other. And so I'm grateful for the way you facilitated this trip and built these relationships and invested in these relationships and opportunities. You did a wonderful job, DeSean, and I'm looking forward to seeing what emerges out of this. So thanks for joining the show today, and we're excited to hear from Daniel shortly. It's good to be with you. Thanks for joining the show. Where are you checking in from?
Thanks, David. I am checking in from South Bend, Indiana.
Wonderful. I know you're in your final weeks of your doctoral program. Congratulations. How does it feel?
The feelings right now are not the best feelings. Stress and being overwhelmed and feeling that I'm not worthy or I cannot do it or I'm incompetent. So mostly negative feelings, but I can see the light. It's coming. It's coming to a good end. I think I put a lot of work and energy into my dissertation. My advisor, my committee like the work that I'm doing, but now it's about let's just get it done. Let's just cross the finish line. So that's where I am.
Totally understand, man. I am excited for you to be on the other side of that. It'll be a little strange because for many years, to me, you've been Daniel at Notre Dame, and I'm not sure who you will be.
Yeah, I've always been that to you.
Right? Who's Daniel without Notre Dame? I'm excited to see who Daniel will be without Notre Dame. You've got so much ahead of you, man. Well, thanks for joining the show and being willing to talk a little bit about your experience with us a couple of weeks ago across the U.S. South on our ReStory US experience. I found this to be one of the most profound experiences I've ever had on a telestrip traveling with you all. So I'm really excited for our listeners to get to hear a little bit about what happened and what it meant to you all. So before we dive into all of the trip, we'd love to hear a little bit more just about your background and kind of what brought you to this experience. I know you're from Bethlehem, but you've spent many years in the States now. So tell us a little bit about that, and then perhaps any expectations you may have had about this experience going in.
So I was born in Jerusalem. I grew up in Beit Sahur, which is a small town by Bethlehem. But I was raised in the U.S. My dad got his master's of divinity and actually in Indiana at a seminary in Indiana. So I grew up as an infant, a toddler in the U.S. Went back to Palestine, grew up and kind of finished high school during the second Intifada, which is a Palestinian uprising from the year 2000 till 2005 and 6. I'm a kind of child of the Intifada. My most profound memories growing up were of that, of being under a blockade, curfews, and killing and shellings. And I became a Christian because of from that time period. By my side bed, like weeping, and because some of my friends were killed, and I'm like, oh, I don't want to go to hell, so I want to have make sure that I gotta go to heaven when I die. I don't know, 13, 14 years old. It's very traumatizing. So I always kind of grew up in that context of violence and dehumanization, of disregard for your humanity, which kind of obviously connects me to the Black experience in the US. But yeah, I moved away, left Palestine, and when I finished high school, my family came to the US, and I been here, did my undergraduate studies here, and then went back to Palestine. Then I came back for my master's, for my graduate studies in the University of Chicago. Then went back to Palestine for a long time, did some work there, taught at Bethlehem Bible College. And then in 2020, during the pandemic, I moved back to the US for my PhD. Yeah, I mean, it's like I have a unique perspective. I'm thoroughly Palestinian, obviously, but also very influenced by and shaped by my experience in the U.S. My formative years, becoming a man, if you will, happened in the U.S. In college. So I always feel out of place. I'm in Palestine. I'm very Americanized. I'm very American, and in the U.S. I'm very Palestinian. There's no place of between those two places. There's no one place that I can call home. But I don't want to drag on with my response, but also in the last 2 years or so, it's been hard being a Palestinian Christian in this country. And when you understand that the whole system, both administrations, there's a whole, and not even just the government, it's the media, it's the people, it's friends. You thought they were friends. Just kind of there's this discovery of how alienating and how hard it is to be a Palestinian American. This kind of overwhelming sense of I'm not really, seen. I'm not respected. My humanity is not really centered or appreciated. I always have to fight for myself to assert my humanity. And now with what's happening, I mean, I think people who listen to this podcast, if they listen like in April of this year of 2025, kind of aware of the dynamics of evictions and revoking visas. So there's a lot of kind of fear and just anger and just the feeling of betrayal by the US, and by people that I thought they were close to me, and relatives. And so it's been very hard, especially when there's a genocide, when your people are being killed left and right, but also beyond just the numbers and what's happening on the ground, this constant sense of disempowerment and dehumanization. So yeah, you escape that. I came to the US thinking that, hey, I can pursue the American dream. I can do beautiful things. I can do whatever I want. But now, in this stage in my life, it's like, wow, and there's a lot to kind of disentangle and interrogate in how I perceive myself in relation to this place and the structures of power that exist here.
Wow. And that's such an honest answer. Thanks for naming all of that. And that kind of like renegotiation of what it means to be living in the US in this moment, especially as a Palestinian and Palestinian Christian, even given, your much longer history in this country that I actually didn't even know that you'd spent so much time in the US prior to your PhD. But this renegotiation in a time of such grief and betrayal, I mean, that's such a real experience. And I'm curious to even hear how that kind of shaped the way you showed up to what we did together down south, where we were, really wrestling with and reckoning with the full spectrum of our history as a country, and the legacies of injustice that we learned about firsthand, that we, walked in spaces where the history was told that still exists today and have just evolved and have just morphed. These legacies of dehumanization and exclusion and erasure, all of the things that you're even naming a little bit about in your experience, just being a Palestinian in the U.S. It's part of the fabric. And so, what do we do with that too? So I'm curious to hear kind of, with that longer history of being in the U.S., knowing a little bit about our history, what you went into this trip expecting, what you felt like you maybe even came with from a knowledge standpoint, and then how it stacked up with the actual experience, how those expectations faced reality.
On a light note, I was invited to come, and if Talos would invite me to something, I'm gonna come to whatever Talos is doing. And I knew that the trip was gonna be great. And so, hey, everyone, if you're listening, go on a Talos trip, any of them, just go.
That was unpaid, for the record.
Unsolicited. But then I'm finishing my dissertation, and my wife was like, Daniel, you need to be reasonable. You have a dissertation. Talos is going to be here next year. Like, you can do this next time. And I'm like, no, I gotta go. And I knew there's something in me that beckoned me to go. Like, I had to go, and I had to be part of that experience. I always knew there's something in common, something profound in the connectedness, the relationship between the Black American story and the Palestinian story. It was always there. The connections were made before by many African American Black activists and thinkers and theologians, and you name it. From people like Mark Lamont Hill to from Ferguson to Palestine. The name escapes my mind right now.
Angela Davis,
and everyone else. There's a lot of work that
Ta-Nehisi Coates, even recently.
Ta-Nehisi Coates in the Message as well. So the connections have been made, and these connections, besides like Cornel West, who's a Christian theologian, but for the most part by secular Black thinkers and activists. So I've always known that there was a missing part of the Christian Black experience and the Palestinian Christian experience. So like politically, we've made that connection together, Palestinians and Blacks and African Americans, but it wasn't clear theologically how we can make that connection. So there was that. I wanted to have that experience. I knew it was going to be an epic and a profound trip, and it was all of that and even more. So I went with that expectation of kind of digging deep in all of that and learning more and making these connections. And I was shocked, David, and it just really like heartbreaking to admit this, but it was shocking to me how easy it was for me to make that connection. The arguments used to justify slavery, the talking points, how Christianity played a significant role in what Dimitri Rahib, the Palestinian theologian, calls the software of the hardware of the empire, how it provided that cover, that justification, that ethical, sensible, reasonable justification for slavery. It's insane. But then it's also the same thing today. Like sensible, good Christians give you similar justifications for the dehumanization of the Palestinians. It was shocking to me that something that happened, in the 19th, in the 17th and 18th and 19th centuries, and even continues today. And like whether it's with segregation or with incarceration, talking points and arguments made, it's insane to me how that persisted for such a long time and still persists today in different ways. But then the Palestinian story becomes just one chapter of this long legacy of dehumanization and violence and weaponization of Christianity and the Bible to justify anything you want. Just fill in the blank. Just if you want to justify ethnically cleansing the natives, okay, here's the Bible for you. If you want to justify enslaving people and dehumanizing them, well, here's a verse for you. Justify taking the land from the Palestinians. There you go. Justifying, harming and massacring Jews in Europe. Well, here's your Bible verse. So it's just such a profound and heartbreaking reality that, it's the same system. It's the same ideology, same ideologies of supremacy and violence and dehumanization. And all of these are done by sensible, good Christians. And it is Christians today who claim to be righteous, who claim to stand against supremacy and stand against, Trumpism or what have you, but they have no problem justifying the genocide of the Palestinians in Gaza. So just heartbreaking and just sad that I was able to make that connection. There's a beauty in that. There's a sense of solidarity that I see myself in the enslaved person, and and maybe the enslaved person would have seen themselves in me as well as a Palestinian. But I wish we didn't have to do that. I wish that wasn't the case. And why is that the case? And how often Christians have been participants in creating those connections between people that should not have been made from the get-go. There should not be a connection between me and an enslaved person from Africa, or why would a Palestinian relate to the American story? These are two different realities. But what connects us is that sense of overwhelming injustice and dehumanization and violence that is committed against us. So it was profound. There was incredible moments of heartbreak and weeping and just trauma and hurt, and especially for me today as a Palestinian who's dealing with what's happening in Gaza and the unfolding kind of destruction of the West Bank right now. But I also had to keep living in that trauma and hurt, and now I'm seeing it in my siblings from the past, and the siblings, my siblings today in the US who are dealing with this as well. It was more profound and was more hurtful than I wanted it to be. But within that, there was that joy. There's joy of solidarity. There's the joy of us coming and drumming and dancing together. The joy of that kind of unspoken commitment to humanizing and loving each other as a group. Just kind of kindred spirits, you had with people, with whether it's the people we met in Selma or the tour guides or the speakers, all of them, there's just kind of this sense of, we are in this together. Let's do this together. Let's keep fighting this good fight. Let's keep making good trouble together. So there's a beauty in that came from midst of the ashes. You have that kind of flower of solidarity and beauty moving us forward. So that was profound. And to do it with a lot of wonderful people from Telos and friends and others that we became friends was really special. And it was a group of me and 3 other Palestinians, and we had 2 African Americans, we had DeSean and we had Jamar Tisby, and we had some others, and just all of us came together in a very profound and beautiful kind of fellowship. It was a profound moment of solidarity and joy together, and as we wept and as we wrestled together.
You're inviting us into so much in that answer. As a participant and facilitator, getting to see those connections happen in real time was so meaningful to me, and in some ways to be able to participate in these conversations. But that shared sense of grief and that shared sense of betrayal, it didn't even have to name it sometimes, but there were moments where you all, particularly there was a dinner conversation that DeSean referenced even earlier, between John and Yusuf and Jamar and around what it feels like to be an educated person from a marginalized background engaging with law enforcement, and how you have to show up in those spaces. And just the watching that conversation happened, and the recognition of how ludicrous it all is, and yet this sense of I see you, I get it, it's the same, it's the same exact feeling, the same exact strategies. was a powerful moment. And just naming all of that betrayal that you named earlier, I'm just grateful for you inviting us into that grief alongside you, because one of the things that also emerged through this experience, as you're naming, is this sense of deep solidarity and connection, of being seen, of being, rather than exiled, included in finding space for belonging. And one of the things that I find so powerful on this trip, especially, is some of the women we meet. You mentioned like Afriye, We Can Do This, and Ainka Jackson, and Mama Callie, all in Selma, who show up with just such a powerful presence of healing and of joy, even in the midst of all of the pain that their communities have faced, all of the struggle that has not gone away. And I'm curious to hear more of like what that felt like for you, of building these solidarity connections, of being in spaces, not only hearing about the damages and ravages of Christianity, but also seeing Christians doing the work on the ground and doing it in such a way that it's inviting everybody into liberation. I've always found that to be a powerful experience, but I'm curious how you encountered that on the trip.
In many ways, I think Black Americans represent the soul of this country. They keep this country human. Um, their brokenness and their resilience and their steadfastness kind of broke a nation, right? A broken nation that was based on supremacy and domination and enslavement. And it said, no, you gotta be human. You gotta see me as a human, right? And this has been the work of incredible civil rights leaders, even before then, abolitionists and others, Frederick Douglass, all the way to, Dr. King, and to the work that has been done by the people you're mentioning as well. There's this kind of this stubborn assertion of humanity and of restoring the soul of this country and of making this country a better union and a better place. So the Black experience and the black resilience and Black beauty and Black joy and all of these things coming together in a profound way to make the US a better country. So that's why kind of the Black story is Black Americans, African Americans are the soul of this country that makes this country, forces this country to be a better country. There's something that we experienced Palestinians recently with a number of us speaking, and there's a lot of kind of excitement and from Americans, from evangelical Americans or otherwise, who are hearing Palestinian Christians for the first time, listening to Munder Isaac's sermon, Christ in the Rubble, and being like so moved by it. And like, we're a bit confused. Like, why are you guys so impressed by what we're saying? Like, we're not really that profound. But then there's this thing that by us sharing our story, it's evoking that sense of, wait, there's something so wrong in how I've been doing things. I need to do things better, differently. So that there's kind of that role that I think we've been assigned, and we're trying to be faithful to respond to it as Palestinian Christians, to like, God, like, here we are, send us, like, what do you want from me? I want to do it. I want to speak up. And we're seeing some people who are responding positively to what the Palestinian Christians are saying as well. So there's kind of beautiful and tragic reality that the stories that we heard, the strength and the beauty of the activists and the speakers that we met with, that kind of resilience and joy breaks our hearts, but also fills them again with so much like joy and kind of strength to keep moving and keep fighting the fight. And it's so good to see it. And again, that kind of sense of shared humanity and shared struggle and solidarity have been really profound. So thank God for all of that. And it's like tragic that it had to happen for so many people to wake up to it. And like, why can't we be Christians when it matters? Why does this country need to go through 300 years of enslavement and dehumanization for the country to wake up? Like, so. But there's a way, like, I don't know, like, there's a question of theodicy, like, why does God allow this to happen? But there's something beautiful and profound in being human again, in the sense of us asserting our humanity, but also by doing so, we're also encouraging others to discover their own humanity and to discover their ability to move away beyond dehumanization into asserting and fighting for the humanity of everyone else. And that's a profound thing, and that's a good thing. And I think we can keep doing that work as well.
That's such a good word, Daniel. I mean, that work of engaging in solidarity, of being in community and relationship with, other marginalized communities is kind of this invitation to say, as you're naming, like, you're human, just as human as me, and we only get through this together. You don't have to carry all of the burden. Like, I'm going to
Mm.
come alongside you and carry it with you. And it reminds me of something that Lama said during our Solidarity in Action gathering, in which she said, we don't want to be heroes. We just want to be human. And this burden that the Christian community, in some ways, in doing the work of listening and trying to amplify the voices of Palestinian Christians, are kind of buying into this unconscious presentation that you all are somehow exceptional and heroes. And many of you are just personally exceptional. You're brilliant people, excellent communicators. And yet there's this burden that comes with a kind of, exceptionalization, when you're like, can we just live our lives in justice and freedom and dignity, and not have to do this work? Can we lament that alongside that? So that came to mind as you were naming that, this sense of, it's a tragedy that this is true, and yet it's also a pathway to healing and to liberation and to humanity, not just for you all, but for all of us who participate in these systems of empire and domination that require, completely unfairly marginalized communities to step up into these roles.
Let me just give you kind of my own kind of theological reflection on this. As a theologian, I kind of think of this theologically all the time. The American story has been of this greatest country in the world, and it's a country based on success and power, and then a pursuit of happiness and comfort. And of course, we know that this has come at the expense of natives and of enslaved people. Right? The country would not be great if it wasn't for the ethnic cleansing of so many natives in Africa, and removing them and forcing them and kicking them out to make this country for you to be a slave owner. And so the country was built on the backs and on bones of these people.
And of stolen land, of the ethnic cleansing of
All of
indigenous
it.
communities here as
Right,
well,
yeah.
right?
The Christian story is a bit interesting. I was thinking of the writings of church fathers like Clement of Alexandria and Irenaeus, who talk about the Genesis 3, about the fall. They made this argument that the fall is not a fall from perfection. It's actually the creation of mature people, of creating whole souls. So their humanity has been made complete. And I think Irenaeus makes this comment that basically Adam and Eve were children. And then when they ate from the fruit, their eyes were open. They had wisdom. They could see. And they can understand what is wrong and what is right. So the brokenness, being kicked out of Eden, being pushed out, is actually was an opportunity to become a better person and a human. So there's the idea that rather than the fall being separation and cursing and punishment, the fall is actually an opportunity to become a better person, a human, a full human. So I think there's that kind of profound story that brokenness ought to at least hopefully make us into better people. Especially, but that comes at that challenges the American story of domination and power that is built on dehumanization and of exploitation and on supremacy and on ethnic cleansing and on enslavement. So the Christian story is antithetical to the American story, right? That is based on domination and power. And the Christian story is that we're becoming more like God. We're becoming more like Christ through the giving up of the self, of the brokenness, of being kicked out of Eden, and toiling in the land. That makes us better people and more human. So there's a mystery in that, but we become better people because of that brokenness, and through that brokenness we can also help others to understand their own humanity. And so there is that kind of work of soul making that has to be done, I think, for those of us who are in the midst of it as Palestinians. There's a work that has to be done by those who have benefited from those structures of powers, like American Christians. And hopefully all of us would be pursuing that kind of journey of soul making, of getting rid of that default position towards power and domination and into a life of soul making and being human again.
Man, that's such a good word. And I'm thinking of the way in which this work of imagination, of casting a vision for what it means to be fully human, what it means to heal from these internalized needs for domination, for security at the expense of someone else, right? And I'm curious how your imagination for liberation, for freedom, for dignity, for Palestinians may have been altered or shifted or expanded even through this experience. Like, what new ideas for collaboration may have emerged, or collective action across these contexts? In what ways were you given more of a vision of like, here's what it looks like to do that work of becoming more human, of finding the fullness of our humanity, as you and I would put it as people of faith, like the image of God within us, this inherent value and dignity. Anything emerge from this trip that feels substantive or like a dream or idea that you might be able to name?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to kind of highlight here. I think just visiting the museums, like the Civil Rights Museum in Jackson, and the Legacy Museum in Birmingham, and just kind of seeing these profound stories of resilience of the freedom fighters, the struggle for freedom in the civil rights movement, and so on. Yeah, they all of these kind of give this kind of push for myself and others like us to keep fighting the fight, to keep like the struggle alive, and not to give in to cynicism or to feel defeated. It's a bit hard because like, why do I have to keep doing this work? But I'm encouraged to see to hear of the stories of these incredible people in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s that kept up the fight and who sacrificed everything to keep fighting the fight. It really challenges the way that I had been thinking as a Palestinian with a lot of access and privilege who lives in this country, who is married to a wonderful American wife and is trying to build for myself like an American comfortable life, pursuing happiness and achieving the American dream. But I think both my experience in the last 2 years and also that my experience in the South have awakened in me this desire to kind of again interrogate how I've been functioning in the world and imagine my life and my career shifting away from pursuing that prestige and comfort in, for example, being an academic or being a professor somewhere. While I could still follow that and pursue that academically, but I think there has to be some kind of serious commitment to the hard work of advocating and humanizing, and to be in solidarity with those who suffer. And that could look in different ways for different people. And I think hopefully the people who are listening as well to like, okay, well, I have this good life here, or maybe I don't have the best life here, but what am I doing here to humanize myself, to discover my own humanity, and to also fight for the humanity of those people around me. And the Black struggle for freedom has been one of those watershed moments of a resilient people who did not give up and who kept fighting to be human and to be humanized again. So I think it expands the way that I think about myself and my own purpose and role in the world. It gives me a better sense of the interconnectedness of the struggle for liberation and for justice. Being reminded by the words of Dr. King about the arc of history that is long, but it bends towards justice. But it doesn't bend by itself. It's because of the people who put their bodies on the line, who did the work, who have been victimized and brutalized for that to happen. That is our responsibility as Christians, to be those who pursue and who work towards that justice, to be those who are doing the work of Christ, of redemption and restoration and creating an abundant life. So there's a beautiful story there to be told of the Palestinian and Black experience and hopefully through that, many others would come alongside us and join us in this journey for collective liberation. We know all too well that we cannot be free until everyone is free. We know too well that injustice anywhere is injustice everywhere. There's a threat to justice everywhere. So we have to understand this. It's not enough to be a good person. What is needed for us is for us to speak up and to stand up and to face the giant and to do that creative, beautiful work of resistance and of humanizing and of fighting for dignity and for humanity.
Amen, man. That's a word we need. I'm reminded of a mural at Studio B, which is one of the places we visit in New Orleans, a huge warehouse kind of transformed by this artist, Brandon Mike Odoms, known as B. Mike. And one of his murals is a kind of reimagination of the Iwo Jima memorial. And the line is, "What do we build on the ashes of a nightmare?" And I just find that so powerful because it's naming the betrayal, it's naming the pain of what has come and where we are, of the injustice around us, of the systemic oppression, all the things that you've been naming that cause us to grieve and that should invite us into lament. And yet our job is to build. The question isn't should we, it's what do we build on these ashes, right? And what you're inviting us into is to do this work of building these connections, of doing this relationship building, of investing in a new possibility, in a new world for all of us that looks like flourishing for all of us, for freedom for Palestinians and freedom also for Israelis, right? From the domination and the lies of supremacy and all of these things. And in the States, freedom for Black communities and dignity for Indigenous communities and all these things, and also for everyone else in this country. Like this is what it looks like to do the work of collective liberation as you're naming. And I know there's an invitation for one way that we can do that in the future that I wanted to make sure that you got the chance to share about. That's happening in Chicago this September. Tell us more about what's going on.
Yeah, no, that's thanks, David. That's great. Thanks for highlighting this. Yeah, no, that's important what you're saying, and I think this is a very essential moment. I think honestly for the soul of the church, for the witness of the church, especially in the U.S., when so many Christians have been silent and complicit. Just like so many Christians were silent and apathetic and complicit about slavery and about segregation. No, even so many Christians were cool with it and they were okay with it. Races should be separated, that God made you dark so that you can work in the sun. Well, I'm a white person. I'll be in my plantation, sitting in my big house. So many Christians were okay with it. They were not maybe slave owners. They did not had people that they controlled, but they were part of the system and they were okay with the system. And even in the 50s and the 60s and 70s, Christians were like, no, guys, come on, slow down. It's fine. Segregation is not a big deal. And these were good Christians. And I think for me, what Gaza is revealing is that there's so much work that has to be done. And so many good Christians are complicit. So one way for us to do that creative and good and challenging work is through this conference that myself, as a representative of the Bethlehem Institute for Peace and Justice and Telos and different groups like Churches for Middle East and others who are putting together, is a national conference, a gathering for Christians that is happening in Wheaton in September 11 to 13 in Wheaton, Illinois, which is meant to be this national conference that brings together Palestinian Christians and American Christians in conversations and community and fellowship, and also for work of solidarity and action and moving forward and in a way awakening the church to what is happening right now. So if you're one of those people who want to do the work, if you feel isolated in your church community and you want to be involved with people who are doing the work that you want to do, if you want to learn more about Palestinians and what they're saying, this is a conference that is for you. So yeah, it's called Church at the Crossroads, and it's based on this belief that we think that the church right now is standing at a crossroads. Are we going to be faithful to Christ? Are we going to follow after the way of the cross? Or are we going to be defaulting back to the ways of supremacy and apathy and violence? It's an important conference. It's a first of its kind, and it's bringing together wonderful group of organizations, including Telos, like I said, and others that are coming together to say, let's do this together. Let's mobilize together. Let's study together. Let's build community together, and let's fight this fight. And again, it's a fight for the soul, I think, of the church. I do think that Gaza has exposed a very dark reality, that so many Christians are okay with violence and with dehumanization. We have a lot of work that is cut out for us. So that gathering of everyone coming together in solidarity, in learning, in fellowship, in conversations, I think is going to be a very pivotal moment for us moving forward. So yeah, check it out at churchatthecrossroads.com. Churchatthecrossroads.com. We have actually registration is open. We have an early bird right now for registration. So check it out. I think it's going to be a really, really profound experience.
Folks, we will be there. We hope to see you there. This is such an important moment for all of us who care, all of us who see the horrors of what's going on and who believe in the possibility of a different way, to come together and to organize, to get to work, to build solidarity and connection with each other, and to stand up with a unified, loud, and bold voice that this is not the way. This is not the way of Jesus. This is not the way to peace. This is not the way to flourishing for any of us, right? There is a different way available. And as Daniel mentioned, this is, at least in my experience, I've never seen all of these organizations coming together like this in something so large. So this will be a profound opportunity. We hope you join us. Get your ticket now. We'll include links in our show notes for you to learn more and to register. But we really hope to see you there. And stay tuned. There will probably be an opportunity for all of the Telos folks who are at that conference to get together and to fellowship and to strategize as well. So we're hoping to have some kind of opportunity probably after the conference ends, but still in the works. We'll reach out when we have more details. But Daniel, I just want to say thank you, one, for joining the show. Of course, your insights are always so powerful and full of wisdom. And two, just for the work you're doing. I know that all of this advocacy engagement is on top of a very busy life of finishing your dissertation. You have a young child, another on the way. I can't imagine how much it takes from you. And we are all the better for it. And you've given so much for us to be invited into this work, to be challenged by, this call to solidarity and to action. And so I just want to acknowledge that and thank you for it. Your voice is so important. And so we're grateful for it. And we're here alongside you in whatever you need to keep up this work, because, we're in this together. As the African proverb says, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. And that feels like the work right now. It's why we did this trip. It's why we're doing this conference. We need to do this work together. So thanks, Daniel. Appreciate you coming on the show and for all the work you're doing.
Yeah, thank you, David. Honestly, people like you, people like Telos, are what kind of keep us going as Palestinian Christians. We feel encouraged by you. We, like you said, we cannot do this alone. So we build each other. We're better people. We're more faithful believers if we do this together. So I'm very thankful for you and for the work you're doing. And yes, let's keep doing this work.
Amen, man. Well, folks, thanks for listening to today's show. As always, you can rate and review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen. Send this episode along to someone who you think might need to hear Daniel's wisdom. It really helps us reach new audiences and expand the show. Folks, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.